Hi everyone, I just wanted to welcome you to the first day of class. Again, I apologize for not being there today. As you can imagine, it was quite um, important for me to be here with my family, especially my mother who's having a hard time. So I appreciate the inconvenience to you, and I suppose if it had to happen on a day of class, the first day is not too bad, at least because it doesn't get us off schedule um, really at all. And it allows me to maybe make these videos, or this video I should say, to get us prepared for the quarter. Um, so there were a couple things I was gonna excuse me, show you in class. I'll just show them on Wednesday. But the important thing for you to know, first of all, is that you do have a quiz on Wednesday, and the quiz it's stated in the materials what the quiz is on. I should have looked this up ahead of time. So the quiz will be on the justice notes from last quarter. These are all on Camino. The retributive justice video, and the Father Shawl on justice. So be prepared to take a quiz on that on Wednesday. Um, for this quarter, the main things for that I would have gone over in class are, and I'll be handing out the syllabi on Wednesday. The quizzes are 40% of the quarter now, not just 35. So they're 40%, which means obviously it's even more important that you be prepared for the reading, having done the reading, and be prepared in class to show me that you've done the reading and can answer questions on it, having read it preferably twice or at least once very closely. Um, there will be an exam in class this time on the 1st of February, but the final will, as before, be online, and the final will be similar to the formats before, where you will take one question and cut and paste the answer to that question right in, and then of course take a quiz on the second part. There's a small paper, um, and as usual, don't wait to buy the books, because who knows what the bookstore will do. And the quarter is set up so that for the reading for each day, um, the quiz will be on the reading for each day. So as you all know from last quarter, you know the drill, so you know that it's set up, the schedule will tell you the day and then the reading for that day, and so that's what you want to do. And then so we have this quarter an exam on the first, where I will give you the questions ahead of time, and you will have to answer 3 of the 4 the day of, but you and I won't know which 3 of the 4, so it'll just be it'll just be uh, you'll just know which 4 it could be, and then the day of I'll just pull 3 numbers out of a hat or something, and those will be the 3 you answer. The paper, which is due on the let's see, the paper is due on the 22nd of February, after President's Day, and then the final exam. You can see, if you look on the schedule, there's 2 different dates there, but it doesn't matter in terms of, you won't have to be in class, but it will be either due by the 22nd of March or by the 20th of March. And the way this quarter is going to differ from last quarter in terms of, say, workload, is the readings are longer but easier. So if you remember at the end of last quarter when we got to Fausia, it may have seemed easier to you, even though the readings were much longer. So I'm not saying that the readings are easy this quarter, but especially after the first third, the readings will get easier. The way the quarter will be set up is that we will first, in the beginning, go through some of the details of what is the rule of law. We'll be asking the question primarily throughout the whole quarter of what is the rule of law. It's a term that everybody knows is important, everybody understands is important, Economists have told us that it's one of the most important reasons, or one of the most important factors in alleviating world poverty and getting growth in these countries is the rule of law. You heard me say this several times last quarter. Well, but what is it? And it's clearly not law, because if you imagine two countries side by side that have the exact same constitutions and the exact same setup in terms of the courts and the legislative branch and the executive branch, the various states and the way everything works. Let's say those two countries are exactly the same side by side in their constitutions. It still might make sense to say, yes, but country A has the rule of law and country B does not. Well, if that's true, then the rule of law is not law, because they both have the same law, but one country has the rule of law and the other one doesn't. Well, what does that mean? And so I want you to start thinking about that. We'll be asking that question primarily throughout the quarter of what is the rule of law. And so the first part of the quarter will be going through that question, primarily looking at different aspects of the rule of law, maybe different attributes, and being very open to this question of what is it. Then the second, then the really second part of the quarter, we'll be looking at this really nice book, Gideon's Trumpet, which is a non-fictional account of a poor man who writes to the United States Supreme Court and asks for a right to an attorney. And so if you know how if you see in cop shows, they say you have a right to an attorney. Well, this is the case in Gideon versus Wainwright, 1963, that established the principle under the Sixth Amendment that you as an American have the right to an attorney, and even if you're too poor to afford one, the state will provide one with you. That was not true before Gideon versus Wainwright. So you'll be reading about his story, a poor man writing to the Supreme Court in pencil on lined paper from his jail cell in Florida to the Supreme Court, making an argument, a constitutional argument, that he had a right to an attorney under the Sixth Amendment to be provided to him if he's too poor. And so you'll be reading that story, which deals a lot with criminal procedure, the criminal justice system, and how you establish law and establish justice. So those are key elements to the rule of law. Then the next thing we'll be reading is a novel, and it takes place in South Africa, and it takes place during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, 1998 roughly to 2000, dealing with apartheid and dealing with questions of how do you prosecute or how do you get justice for things that have occurred in the past, and if people are seeking asylum for or seeking to be forgiven legally, that's not the right term, but to be given, I'm just drawing a blank right now for the right word. They'll petition the state, but then they have to come forward and tell the whole truth of what they did. And so we'll be talking about the question of truth versus justice in terms of establishing law and establishing a workable judicial system in a place like that's trying to heal at the time of Mandela in the late 90s or early 90s into late 90s, of how to deal with the past and the horrible past of apartheid. And so we'll be spending some time on that. And it's a novel, so it's relatively easy to read. And then the final part of the quarter will be, the final week, we'll come back to Fausia, and we'll look at her treatment in the United States and the procedures that she was given or not given as somebody who was not an American citizen, and had fled to the United States, as we know from last quarter, seeking asylum. By the way, the word I was trying to think of was amnesty. In South Africa, they were seeking amnesty. But she was seeking asylum coming in from Germany, really Togo through Germany, seeking asylum and the way she is treated in the United States and what procedures were engaged in. So the rule of law is primarily, although not only, about procedure. It's about how. It's about, as I'm going to say several times throughout the quarter, it's like law and then law-ing. Like, how do we law? This is the law. How do we implement the law? How do we uphold the law? Uh, uh, how do we adhere to the spirit of the law? That's all more along the lines of the rule of law, which seems then to me it's about character. It's about the fact that it shouldn't matter who the judge is. It shouldn't matter whether or not she's having a bad day. It shouldn't matter who the police officer is. It shouldn't matter whether or not he's having a bad day. Their job is to act as an officer. Their job is to act as a judge, not to act as John or Maria or anybody else. And so, to the extent that the rule of law is about law-ing or implementing law or adhering to the principles of law, then it shouldn't matter. It should be rather impersonal in the best meaning of impersonal. So, as you'll hear me say several times, you don't want Brian to correct your paper. You want the professor to correct your paper. Because what if I don't like you? What if I think you're weird or whatever it is my prejudices are? Well, we all have our biases, but the point is I wasn't given the power to correct you and to grade your papers based upon my biases. I was given it the power to you to act as the professor, not as Brian. And so the same thing, you want the law to rule, not the person. The officer through, and the law through the officer, the law through the judge, the law through the governor, the law through the legislator even, you want that to rule, not their own particular biases and prejudices and evaluations of things, okay? So I want you to think about what is that principle? What is the rule of law insofar as it's about implementing law, adhering to law, upholding the spirit of law, uh, and then can you articulate or think about why it's so important for companies like Apple? They don't want to invest in a country that doesn't have the rule of law. Because if, again, if it's person by person deciding, judge by judge, police officer by police officer, just depending upon their personalities, well, then there's no predictability. Well, then why would you ever invest in such a country? You don't know how your contracts are going to be upheld. You don't know whether or not the rule of law is going to be upheld, and that meaning that you don't know if your intellectual property is going to be respected. You don't know any of that. Well, then why the hell would you ever invest there? You wouldn't. So you'd go to another country. So this is why economists think, even though they're not lawyers, they understand the importance of the rule of law. So those are the 4 parts of the quarter, really. The first part dealing with the definitions, second part dealing with Gideon and the establishment of, as part of the rule of law or law-ing, that everybody in the criminal justice system has to have an attorney. Third part, Apartheid and Red Dust, the novel Red Dust, dealing with questions of how to establish a legal principle and the rule of law in a country that both needs justice from past abuses, but yet on the other hand also wants to move on. And then the fourth part about Faucia and the way she was treated, how law was implemented, or the rule of law not fully implemented when it came to her case. So the syllabus and the schedule are both up on Camino. I'll be handing out hard copies of both of them on Wednesday. I planned to do that today. The couple things that are new to the syllabus that are important is I just made it very clear in there that I don't change grades at the end of the quarter, so don't ask me. A couple students last quarter asked me. Once the grade's in, it's in. So the only thing that at that point I can change your grade is if I made a math mistake. But otherwise, the best way for you to affect your grade is actually all quarter long to do the reading. I also am implementing a policy where no one can get an A in the class who doesn't contribute. or participate. So it had last quarter certain students who received A's who I don't think even once all quarter long raised their hand. That's not going to happen anymore. We just need too much to participate. There's too many times in class when I say, what do you think of this? And there's just silence. That's fine if that wants to continue, but then those people can't get an A. An A in philosophy requires participation, and participation includes raising your hand and saying, I don't understand this. The author said this, that's confusing. Last week you said this, professor, that seems to go against what you're saying now, or I disagree with you, or anything. But I need your contributions. It can't just be lecturing the whole time. And I know I'm guilty of lecturing a lot too, but I need your contributions. And so there's no way I can feel comfortable giving somebody an A if they are not raising their hand at least 5 times in the quarter, where I don't even have to, if it's clear to me, it's like, oh, well, she raised her hand, well, then that's met. And it's only for an A. If you don't meet it, you get an A minus, which is not the worst thing in the world. But A means excellence, and excellence in philosophy means raising your hand, because excellence in philosophy requires contribution and participation. Okay, and this is a philosophy class. So again, no laptops. Don't even bring them to class. There's would have gone over this the first day. The readings are on the home page. They're in order for the quarter, so it's all right there. Attendance, same thing. You get 3 absences. You get 3 quizzes that you get to drop. I just dropped the 3 lowest ones, which means that if you're in class every day, taking the quizzes every day, then I just dropped the 3 lowest you took. Of course, if you miss class 3 times, then those are those 3 zeros are obviously the 3 that you drop. If you miss more than 3 classes, you need medical documentation to avoid the 3% being taken off. So last thing, just to go over this, the quarter theoretically or in its definition, it's about a complementary with an E, not I, C-O-M-P-L-E, complete, like salt and pepper are complementary, they complete each other. So this quarter is complementary to the concept of law from the first quarter, because it's the rule of law. So you have law and you have the rule of law. So it's complementary to the first quarter. And in fact, we might even say that law to be law, the things we studied last quarter, really require the rule of law. Otherwise, it's law in name only. If you have an entire constitutional structure that nobody follows, is it even law? Or does it require that it be enforced in order for it to be law? Again, think about the how of the law, the implementation of it. And again, I'll go through on Wednesday, I'll show 2 of those videos that I was going to show today. But again, if you have any questions, just go ahead and write to me. And I do thank you again for the inconvenience of missing the first day of class. Okay, I'll see you Wednesday.